Good morning, everyone. And as promised, we have our Congressman Jodey Arrington on line one this morning. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Dave. Matt, good to be with you.
Are you all safely hunkered down in keeping your 6-foot distance there in Washington, D.C.?
Well, you know, when you live with 3 young children, you feel like you're in a petri dish and at risk for all kinds of sicknesses. But so I may be immune to this thing just on account of having children. But no, look, we're working, but we are all taking the necessary precautions that we're asking our fellow Americans to do, at least in the short term, so that we can stay ahead of the curve and manage this in a way that we don't inundate the healthcare system. I think that is, the fact that older people are the most vulnerable to dying from this virus, and that we don't want to see a spike like China and Italy where we inundate the system. If you can manage those two things, really you can keep this in perspective and realize that far more people, millions of people have been affected more by the seasonal flu, and tens of thousands have died from it. And only 80% of the folks who contract this particular virus 80% will only be low to no symptoms. So keep it in perspective. Let's not freak out, but let's be vigilant and let's take it seriously, and let's all do our part.
Well, Congressman, one of the themes that we see, in fact, we have a text this morning that says this should be treated like any other virus, and that seems to be a theme among many of our audience. Can you explain why we have basically shut America down? And that is very dramatic. It's going to, I suspect, have some grave ramifications for some businesses. Can you explain why we are not treating this like other viruses and just going on about our business?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to be very candid with you about it. I struggle with that myself because there's a delicate balance here to making sure that we don't become China or Italy and have something that is truly disastrous and a major pandemic crisis and a crisis for our country. And that there are just so many unknowns with this virus. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have treatment. And these things change, and we just don't know which way it's going to break. Will it get worse? Will it get better? So the fact that we have unknowns make this different. And I agree, we have to be careful that we don't create a greater second wave of economic disaster as a result of the measures that we are implementing. But I do think that in the short term, an abundance of caution is reasonable and responsible. And I think that at this point, nobody wants to leave anything to chance, and that's the mode we're in. And again, I think from the grassroots, individual level, at every level of government, people need to take that precaution. But I agree with your caller that, at least in the future, when we get through this, first of all, we need to learn lessons like South Korea did so that they can set up more quickly and have testing capacity, and we need to look at our supply chains and things of that nature. But we can't be dealing with crises like this every time we have a virus outbreak, because there'll be more in the future. It would be way too costly. It would be way too damaging, and we can't sustain this economically. So I agree in principle with what they're saying, but there are unknowns, and we have to take it seriously. And this is really more of a short-term, sort of extreme precaution in the short term.
I think there's a whole lot of Americans who are scared to death.
Yes, you're right. I think that's a big part of it. Again, when you don't have a vaccine, you don't have treatments, just that alone gives people tremendous anxiety. But we have to keep our wits about us. We have to strike the appropriate balance so that so that we mitigate the longer term damage that we're going to do. But again, short term, I think that what we're doing is responsible. And again, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, Dave, I think we're going to know if we're out of the woods or not in terms of being able to manage this all the way through.
So, Congressman, the House voted through an economic stimulus package that kind of worries me a lot more than the coronavirus itself. Not because I know what's in it, but because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are the ones that put it together, and I don't know what's in it. Can you explain, is this economic stimulus package a good thing or a bad thing, and should we worry that the Democrats put this together?
So I'm glad you asked that, because I think there's a lot of clarity that needs to be provided here. The Democrats had their own economic stimulus package, except that it had a lot of policies that were not even relevant, that they were trying to advance in the dark of night on account of this crisis. Part of that was repealing the Hyde Amendment, which are protections for us using federal monies for abortion, things
Right.
of that nature that have nothing to do with it. But because of the president's engagement and Republicans and Nancy Pelosi being willing to negotiate, we were able to get a much better piece of legislation to the Senate. And that's always good, Matt, because if she'd have sent her extreme socialist whatever, legislation, that would have been a much lower floor, and it would have been a much harder deal to negotiate with our Republicans in the Senate. The fact that we took away the expansion of entitlements, new permanent entitlements, and just made targeted temporary relief based on tax credits for small businesses, that is appropriate. And it's probably not just appropriate, it's necessary to make sure that our workers, our families, our small businesses especially, don't have to suffer on account of the fact that federal government is saying everybody stay in and hunker down. And this is a national emergency. This isn't like the financial crisis where businesses made dumb decisions and they should pay for it. This is something that happened beyond the control of these small businesses. So I think you should take heart. You're listening to your voice, your representative. I'm telling you that this bill was far better after we negotiated with the Democrats in the House than it would have been otherwise.
Okay. And Congressman, one other thing before we go to a break, it says that Donald Trump, President Trump, wants to give Americans checks for $1,000 or even more. Is that something that's even viable, and how are we going to afford it if everybody in the United States got $1,000? That'd be $350 billion just off the top. And if you start adding more or monthly checks or anything like that, that just doesn't seem viable.
Well, that's what they're talking about in the Senate right now. The president has proposed about $1 trillion in economic relief and stimulus. Mainly, half of that's probably direct funding. Some of that's SBA loans, disaster loans, and then the distressed industries that are most impacted. Here's their philosophy behind it. I've got to look at the legislation before I decide anything, but their whole point is you're either going to pay a little now or you're going to pay a whole lot in the future when we're in a sustained recession for years and whole industries are collapsed. We have a great economy. As y'all know, we've talked about it for the last year. And because of the tax cuts and all the other things that we've done, this economy is strong, the fundamentals are good, and we can bounce back and be as strong and continue to grow as we've ever been. But we've got to find a way to cushion the blow from this. I don't know that that's the answer, but I know that that's one of the things on the table, and I think we should have everything on the table and look at it.
All right.
Hey, Congressman, a texter this morning wants to know, is there abortion funding in the bill?
No, but they should know that it's because Republicans negotiated with Pelosi. And you're not going to hear this very often, but I want to be honest with my people back home. I want to give credit to Nancy Pelosi for negotiating with Republicans. She didn't have to do that. They already have the votes. But she did, and we took out the poison pills, and we stopped this from being a big government expansionist bill to one that's temporary and targeted and based on tax credits, not direct funding.
You don't hear that very often.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of Congressman Jodey. And we are back here on 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO. And we want to get back to the phones and Congressman Arrington. Okay, there we go. Our phones are getting really tricky this morning. Congressman, there was the barrel of oil yesterday was trading. What did you say?
Little under 29. So
$29, 28
something.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have to send all of our oil producers $1,000.
They're going to need a whole lot more than $1,000 to
this
$30 barrels of oil.
This sounds to me like this is something that's going to be could be very potentially bad for Texas.
Oh, I think it's bad for the economy and national security when you have Russia and OPEC playing games. They would love nothing more than to put our shale oil and gas developers out of business. The abundance, the affordability of energy, and our energy independence is absolutely a cornerstone for American prosperity and security. So we have to pay attention to these things, guys, in the midst of a national emergency. You just do. I think the president's right to buy oil for the national oil reserves. I think that's appropriate. I think that will help some. But I think that while there's this trade war going on, I think it's appropriate to look at the possible measures like tariffs on foreign oil. I'm not saying that's the answer long term, and I'm not a big tariff guy, but it's certainly been successful with respect to hitting reset with China and keeping them at bay and holding them accountable. And it worked with Mexico in terms of them putting troops on their border and playing better with us. So we need to look at other ways. I'm not saying that we need to send direct monies to them, but we need to do the things I mentioned, at least examine all the opportunities for us to sort of shelter them from the tariff battle that's going on. The trade war that's going on with Russia and OPEC.
So, Congressman, can I ask you real quick? Do you think that both Saudi Arabia and Russia they did this at the wrong time without knowing? You've got honestly, it looks like they're destroying themselves now. Without people traveling, the oil's not flowing, which means they can't turn the spigots off and make the price go back up. They literally are stuck with this low price. Do you think that they're hurting themselves?
Well, I think they're hurting everyone, but I think government-controlled economies and trying to centrally plan the supply of anything, any resource, but energy included, is a disaster. A supply and demand and market economies are the most efficient. They will tell you what you need to do to increase or decrease the supply. And I think it ends up hurting that country, but it also distorts the markets and hurts other market participants, including the U.S.
Okay.
One other thing, the Dow, or I should say the stock market, I noticed this morning I was reading that futures for today look really bad. They're expecting it to go down today. What's up with that? Any ideas?
Well, I'm concerned about the long-term viability of the economy. I'm concerned about the resiliency and the bounce back to where we were, which was the longest expansion of our economy that we've seen in the history of the United States. I think the markets are going to fluctuate. They hate uncertainty. And if anything, we're in an uncertain time. So I don't put a lot of stock in the bouncing around and the up and down of the stock market. I'm trying to make sure that we can bridge this time and we can get back to a place where we're picking up where we left off, and we've got more jobs than people to fill them, and we're hitting on all cylinders as an economy, and I think we can get there, and I think we can do it by the fourth quarter. But we got to get between here and there and make sure that we don't do any permanent damage or set bad precedents on policies that you guys have mentioned. So we've just got to do a pretty delicate dance between here and there.
Well, quickly, what about your comments, your thoughts on the Democrat presidential nominees?
Neither of them are the right leaders for our country. They would be a third wave of disaster, quite frankly. I mean, progressive liberals are just a strong cousin to socialists, and we had a situation where Obama grew the government and had activist policies with the fourth branch, the regulators, and activist judges, and we don't need that. We need freedom, and we've seen the response from those policies.
Congressman, there's the music, so we're up against a hard break here.